Hello, Evie Barrett here, Deputy News Editor at PRWeek UK. This is an interview I recorded with Natalie Evans, Managing Director of Web Editorial at LADbible, back in January for PRWeek's Future of the Media series. The video was published on prweek.co.uk earlier this month, and we're now rolling out the series on our podcast feed. Within the interview, some of the topics discussed by Natalie include what stories work best for LADbible and how that's changed, becoming less reliant on Meta and Google's algorithms, use of AI, how LADbible is shedding its old stereotypes, co-creating content with brands, and other advice to PR professionals. It was a really insightful look at where publishing is going from the perspective of one of the most prominent social-first news outlets. Hope you enjoy. Welcome, Natalie. Lovely to be chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
To begin with, I wonder if you could explain a bit about your background and kind of what your current role involves, as well as the wider LADbible editorial setup.
Absolutely. So I am the new Managing Director of LADbible Web Editorial and Betches UK. I joined in November, so I'm still very new, still learning the ropes. My background is actually all tabloids, digital leadership. So I've done sort of the big three of the tabloids. I started with the Mirror, then went to the Mail, and the Sun most recently. The last 10 and a half years of my career has been spent in the US, in New York, so sort of launching British startups in the US is sort of my niche, and joined LAD a few months back. Solly tempted me back over an ocean, which I never thought would happen. But it was just such an exciting opportunity to become part of this brand, and I was ready for another challenge, and this was definitely it. Like, I know everyone knows LAD as like a great social publisher, and so I've been brought in to oversee editorial strategy and elevate our journalistic offering, which maybe people don't always necessarily associate with the brand. And obviously launch Betches in the UK, which is such an exciting prospect. So yeah, very, very exciting times.
Amazing. And what does that journalistic offer from LAD look like? I mean, how do you find stories, and how do you find this is evolving in current times?
It is definitely evolving. It's definitely the right word. I think the key for us is we find stories where our audiences are. You know, the way that sort of digital publishing used to work, and certainly from my background in tabloids, there was a real element of aggregation. It'd be, you know, you'd see something doing well elsewhere and want to do a version of it, and obviously with algorithm changes and things like that, it just doesn't work anymore. And so being able to get back to sort of what makes a great story, I think we sometimes forget as journalists or just consumers of media. You know, I'll be sat there and I'll see something on my phone, or I'll be talking to a friend about something, and you forget actually that's a story. You know, I'll sometimes maybe think of something and then see another publication has written about it, and I'll be like, what? That was obviously a story. Why didn't I think of that? So, you know, we all forget. But I think, finding stories where our audiences are. You know, we're on social, we're in communities. You know, just wherever there is something that you would, you know, LADbible is known as the best mate of the internet. And it's like something, would you turn around and say to your friend, oh my God, have you seen this? I think what's important for us at the moment is getting back to that originality, getting back to the content, what makes a great story, and trying to get there before anyone else has. You know, we want to lead the news agenda, we don't want to follow. So getting to something and being able to start the conversation, be part of the conversation, not really sort of being reactive as much.
And how do PR professionals play a role in that? Because obviously there's the traditional kind of written press release that may not always translate to sort of social publishing. So how do you kind of work with comms professionals in that?
I think it definitely needs to be more collaborative, and on both sides I don't think we necessarily always get it right. I think we're two sides of the same coin, and we actually, you know, we want the same outcome. And I think, you know, the days of sending a press release and it landing in an inbox, like, I'll hold my hand up and say, sorry, you know, we've all got very busy inboxes. I'm not going to pretend that mine's any busier than anyone's, but sometimes, you know, the days of just blanket sending press releases, if I see something drop in my inbox and it doesn't even have my name on it, it's instantly getting deleted. Sorry to anyone who's, you know, dropped that in. Even if it does have my name, you know, think about it if you were trying to like pitch an idea, or again, like talking to a friend, like even if you just say, hi, Natalie Evans, and then roll into sort of like, here's all this thing, it doesn't feel as authentic. I think working together and being more collaborative, like I'd be really open to chatting to PRs and seeing like, okay, you know, so we work out where we're both coming from. Like we've got a lot of insight from our industry that we can tell you, you know, like what things are trending, how people are, you know, reacting to certain things. Like we are very data driven, you know, not to the point where, you know, the tail wags the dog, but we can give you insights, and I'm sure you guys can give us insights. So maybe spending a bit more time together to be like, okay, here's how, you know, we speak to half of UK adults, like a third of 18 to 34-year-olds. So thinking maybe more like, how would this land with a 22-year-old woman or, you know, 27-year-old guy, and be able to shape it that way rather than it just sort of be quite generic. Like generic as blah, it's never going to work. So yeah, I'd like to see us working together a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be about collaboration, especially because it's not just about pitching stories and getting coverage when it comes to being a social publisher. I know that you guys are quite open to sort of co-collaboration with brands on projects and kind of like featuring in your original series and
Definitely.
that kind of thing. What's the most effective way for brands to kind of get involved in that kind of thing?
I think what's so important is seeing us as sort of co-creators. And like, I think sometimes with, you know, journalists and PRs, it can be like a bit of a means to an end. Like, I just need to place this in this publication, and like see it more as like, it sounds a bit ridiculous, but like more of like the journey. Like if we can get together at the start of it and work out what that looks like, you know, I'm not going to pretend that it's going to work every, you know, in every single instance, but treating us as sort of peers and equals, and like, here's, you know, we're co-creators in this. And, you know, we're really open. I think LAD is one of the industry leaders of like being open to working with creators, working, you know, again, like I think the term creator applies to so many more people than just influencers on social media. You know, there are some brilliant brains in this industry. And so like, yeah, reaching out, introducing ourselves, working towards that common goal. And we are super open, and the way of creating media is changing anyway. So if we shape it together, then the output's going to be so much better for it.
Absolutely. In terms of kind of putting content out on social platforms, obviously you guys are quite reliant in a lot of ways on Meta and TikTok's platforms, and the algorithms there are always changing. How does that impact your editorial strategy?
I think as an industry, we've been way too reliant on platforms, and like, you know, it's understandable, you know, that the journey of, you know, from being Google and Facebook, and that's where we were meeting our audiences. Like, I remember when I became a journalist a long time ago, 17, 18 years, I'm showing you my age there. People would turn around to me. I did print journalism as a qualification, and people were like, why are you getting into this now? You know, the career's going to be dead and gone. You know, people are on Twitter. And I think, you know, back then, anyone with a mobile phone could become a citizen's journalist. And then, you know, we're competing with audiences there. And so I think algorithm change and things like that is just the nature of the beast. It's a headwind we have to face now. And, you know, it can be frustrating when we've tried to partner. And, you know, we do partner, don't get me wrong, like there's still a great relationship there. But we've had to stop thinking in terms of platforms and just sort of reverse it and think, what is a great bit of content? You know, try to be, as far as possible, platform agnostic and think, okay, this is a great story. What is, you know, the nuts and bolts of it? What is the great human interest angle? And then be able to not just, you know, put it across loads of different platforms. We know we have to be strategic. We have to think, okay, maybe this video will work for a TikTok, or maybe if we have like this post in a Reddit forum. To that point as well, I think we need to diversify where we put our content. You know, Meta and Google are the big two, they always have been, but you can't build a strategy around that. You know, in many ways, traffic on those platforms needs to be considered bonus traffic, or, you know, eyeballs, revenue that comes with it. But, you know, going into different diversification, like, you know, there's so many communities on Substack now. Reddit's a great little place to find, you know, if you double down. I know a lot of my guys are like in their reality TV. And so, yeah, just like thinking story first and then working out where it goes and not the other way around.
Yeah. Do you think it's less about kind of reach now and like the figures and more about sort of that engagement and the quality of that?
Definitely. I think, you know, in certainly in my last job and in this one now, I think a lot more about quality over quantity. There was once a time where it's like, if you put out, you know, X amount of stories a day, and that's that's what becomes that churnalism. No one got into this career to just knock out 10 stories a day, and that sort of beast, the days of that are over. I think our audiences are wise to it as well. You know, there was a time when probably certainly tabloid publishers would be, you know, quite clickbaity. We'd draw you in and then there'd be no substance to it. And you see it reflected in the stats, you know, the bounce rate on this. There's no scroll depth. And there's so many different sort of stats and figures that we're looking at now that aren't just page views. You know, we want to make sure that our editorial excellence shines through in our stories. And, you know, it's a real reset point for us at LAD to go, okay, we're creating more original content. We're thinking about like user experience, for want of a better word. You know, people pick up our stories and they want to be able to like be engaged. We want to like, you know, our motto is like, we want people to laugh, think, act. You know, if you are reading this, have we entertained you? Have we made you think about something? Have we made you want to go and maybe read more about it or act on it? And so that sort of volume isn't necessarily there anymore. And on the flip side, there's no mistaking that, you know, there is still value in our Google or Meta traffic. You know, that's still there. They're still the biggest players in the industry. And it's just about sort of keeping the business as usual there while, you know, diversifying. So it's a bit of a juggling act, but it's also like really exciting, you know, getting back to great storytelling, great journalism.
And how do you think AI is playing a role in kind of changing the job description of a journalist?
I love this question. I think it's one of the biggest sort of fears my team have. You know, like so many industries out there, people are like, is AI going to take my job? And the short answer is no, absolutely not. And I think it's just about working out how we use AI. Like there are publishers out there who will produce AI content and just fire it out as is. And those publishers now kind of are getting a reputation for low quality, clickbait, you know, those kind of things. And that's absolutely not what we want to be using AI for. And one of the things since coming to LAD that I'm so excited about is that real innovative spirit. We have big goals, we're super ambitious, but we also are, I mean, it comes with the nature of being sort of like millennial and Gen Z focused, is, you know, we are very AI savvy. And I think for me, in terms of sort of the day-to-day newsroom, I want to be able to use AI, and we already are using AI to sort of take the heavy lift out of some of the more menial tasks. It will never replace humans. It will never replace the human creativity. Having a human in the loop is essential, imperative. I would never not have humans in there. But, you know, as we've seen, like, I'll go on ChatGPT, I will help it, you know, I consider it like my second brain sometimes. Particularly if I've got a lot of meetings or notes or something, it's a good way for me to, say, be able to focus in a meeting, but then I can transcribe, and I've also got sort of my written notes afterwards. And I encourage the team to do that. We've also got some great tools at LAD that we've built in-house. You know, we have Mission Control, which gives us like all our sort of like a stats dashboard. We have LAD Radar, which is kind of like similar to Data Miner, where it will sort of take sentiment or where things might be picking up like a heat map of trends, and we're able to be quicker to stories that way. And, you know, that is only a bonus. But it's never going to replace the actual journalism, the creativity, the humans in there. And we just, you know, it makes us work smarter, not harder.
Yeah, I mean, being a business with quite a distinct tone of voice, I would imagine you kind of have a bit of an advantage in kind of maintaining that and kind of not letting AI kind of take over completely. Is that something that you're kind of quite keen to
100%. And one thing that I want to use AI for more is, like, we have such great IP, and just sort of being able to maximise that. So, you know, if we've got some great shows or podcasts or some of our studio stuff, being able to translate that to maybe a web article or clip, you know, again, just some of the toolings that help improve workflows. You know, if we've got snack wars, can we clip it? Can we do, you know, if Harry Kane says a great line, we can sort of have a transcript there to be able to turn it into a web article. Whereas, you know, a while ago you would have had to have sit and, you know, I mean, it's been a while since I've had to use my 120 minute shorthand. So it's there, you've got the transcript. And again, it's sort of like, I think it'd be so key for that multimodality aspect of like because audiences now, we're smart, you know, people want to, you know, the content they want from the type of vertical they want, and they want it in the format they want it. Do I want to listen to it, you know, listening to a podcast on the way to work, or if I sit down after work and I want to watch maybe something more visual, or sometimes, you know, if you're in a tube carriage and, you know, you don't have your headphones or whatever, you can scroll it. And so that expectation is there. So using AI to be able to, you know, it's our own IP, it's our own voice. We're not asking, you know, internet, and we know, I mean, AI is evolving all the time, but it still hallucinates. And we don't want to take any kind of risk with that. And so being able to use our own words but make them go further, use our own creativity and our ideas and make them go further, I think is the most important thing.
And speaking of having savvy audiences, I guess one of the other challenges is the rise of kind of fake content and kind of AI obviously making that look so much more real to your average person. But obviously your audience is going to be highly sensitive to that kind of thing. How do you kind of verify the content that you're seeing and making sure that you're not kind of putting out false information? I
mean, it's a huge worry. You know, we as a reputable publisher never want to put anything out that, you know, we're not sure about. And I think, you know, we have robust processes in place to make sure that we get clearance, that we're checking the validity of things. I mean, it's great because the advances in AI are mind-blowing. Like, you see some of these videos, I think one of them started with, was it rabbits or something in a garden on a trampoline, and then there was, like, you know, bears, and you kind of see things. And, you know, I think even in that short space of time, we've seen such, like, huge leaps forward. But I also think our audiences are getting much more savvy to it, in the same way that audiences are savvy to clickbait. You know, we often say, like, it's more about a curiosity gap. Has it made you want to click into it? Not, you know, you can see clickbait a mile off. You can see AI slop a mile off. And, you know, I see even in my Instagram feed, I'll go into the comments and it's just AI slop, really obvious. And, you know, there are some tells. It's also really dangerous at times, you know. I mean, obviously I've just come back from being in the US for so long, with all the different things that's kicking off, say in Minneapolis, for example. There are AI generated videos that are knocking around, and it's, you know, on the fun side of it, there's, oh, this is, you know, a bear delivering a puppy to a doorstep. Where it gets very dangerous is if it's like manipulated video or content that changes the narrative, or, you know, fuels, you know, something more sinister. So it's really, really important for us that our processes are robust as possible. If there's ever anything that we have produced that involves AI, whether it's even really simple stuff like just extending a background or things like that, you know, sometimes it is really handy. We'll always label it so our audiences know, but it's, it has to be. And again, that's why it's so important to have that human in the loop, to be able to go, okay, does it pass the taste test? Do I need to dig deeper? Because usually if you have a gut feeling about something, it's probably right, and, you know, dig into that.
Of course. I think anyone who's kind of been following your brands in recent times will have noticed that the focus of the content has perhaps evolved from the traditional sort of lad culture stuff to sort of, I guess, you guys trying to be a bit more socially responsible and talk about really important topics. Given that there's been a bit of a decline in the trust in the media, do you think that's kind of a responsibility that you guys have taken on? How do you kind of view that approach?
Absolutely. And, like, I appreciate, you know, you guys acknowledging sort of that shift. I think sometimes, you know, maybe stereotypes that are associated with the brands can stick, and, you know, it's very much not the case. It's also one of the reasons that I wanted to join LADbible. You know, I am very much, you know, female empowerment, equality in my newsroom. I don't want to come somewhere that's a very laddie culture, and it was a question, you know, that I brought up in my sort of recruitment process and was thoroughly reassured by it. There's actually so many fierce women who are running this business in SLT. So, like, if any of your audience are worried about that, like, I would encourage people to reach out and, like, learn about the setup here. But in terms of our content, no, you're entirely right. And I think, you know, same as I've touched on before about that journey of how publishers did go for a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and it fueled, you know, that sort of period in time where the hits were there, they were easy, the programmatic revenue was flowing, and that's just not the case anymore. I mean, for a publisher like Lad and the whole of LADbible group, like, we very much take that responsibility seriously, and with scale comes that, you know. I mean, I think the beauty of LAD and, what is reflected in the content and will continue to be reflected in the content is that we take an approach where we don't talk down to our audiences, we don't preach. It's, to get back to that sort of like best mate of the internet sort of vibe, we can tackle difficult conversations, we can take maybe taboo topics or, things that maybe more mainstream legacy media wouldn't touch. So, for example, we just recently did a porn campaign. And, you hear the words porn and people are like, not touching that. But it was such an important conversation, particularly, in light of, around the world, this like male loneliness epidemic, or how men are women and how men are learning about sex. The whole, UK government campaign about violence against women and girls, which we actually partnered with Number 10 on, and that was a big moment for us, because you might not necessarily think of like LADbible as like Number 10 and LAD, but we are the best platform to be able to share that message. We speak to young men, we speak to young women, and so like being able to tackle those topics and in a very sensitive way, in a way that doesn't shy away from the difficulty of the conversations. We can be really forward thinking. With the porn campaign, it came out, a lot of people didn't really want to touch it. There's some daytime TV were sort of like, oh, it's not quite for us, but then it gained momentum. And then people were like, oh, actually, no, this is a super important conversation and we want to, be part of it. And so it kind of snowballed from there. So like we take that responsibility seriously. And it's also, from my web editorial hat on, it's why the quality of our journalism is so important and why we're trying to elevate that and, get out of old habits and be able to like really bring that editorial excellence to our output.
Absolutely. Within your role, you're also managing director of Betches UK, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, more of a kind of feminine, pop culture focused brand. How do you engage that community? Is it a sort of a different approach, or is there a lot of crossover with sort of the traditional LAD audience?
There is quite a lot of crossover, actually. I think probably the best way to describe it is like it's sort of like the same kind of like mission, same sort of genesis of it, but talking to different audiences. Like LAD and Betches actually are very, very similar brands. I think when LAD acquired Betches in October 2023, it was sort of the marriage of two like brilliant, very similar companies that both founder-led. They're both actually about the same age. I think it's like 14, 15 years old. Both, millennial founders who I think both companies have brilliantly been able to navigate their audiences growing older, but also engaging the younger audiences the way, like you've seen with Betches, it started as 3 college friends. They went through, graduation, they went through getting married, having babies, that kind of thing. And so that's where Betches brides, Betches, moms, things like that have come from, but also still managed to talk to like Gen Z, engage them, and it's exactly the same with LAD. I think the thing with Betches in the UK that we want to be able to replicate, there's such a brilliant blueprint with the guys in the US. I think it's just talking to those different audiences, again, to the same kind of point of that social responsibility, like being able to find, women's publishers, feminine publishers, it's quite saturated. There's such a gap in the market for what we're trying to do, though. We sort of like say we talk to the girls, gays and theys, and like seeing representation, I think that you don't see it enough. We're obviously, our humour is so important, funny content. But again, like sort of outspoken and being able to say what we mean, be, with our full chest, be committed to, to seeing something through, opinionated. Our team is small at the moment. There's only myself and 2 others, and I'm not producing this brilliant content. I'm just like the mom. But we're building out the team, and I think, what we're trying to do differently that maybe replicates a bit more of what the US are doing, that you're seeing more in legacy publishers now, is having that sort of face, like our journalists, our creators, our brands within the brand. And so, whether it's a funny little sketch, whether it's a red carpet, whether it's, a more important, like, some of our CSR initiatives. But yeah, both have that sort of same background crossover, but just talk to different audiences. And yeah, Betches UK is such an exciting prospect.
with that, we're kind of seeing the lines blur between journalist and creator nowadays. I mean, I suppose if it's going to happen anywhere, then it's kind of social first.
Yeah.
Is that a change that you're welcoming, sort of more influencers in the newsroom, as it were?
I think, yeah. I think, you know, it's something that that LAD have, again, been at the forefront of, because it's been so social first and creator-led. In my previous sort of roles, and certainly in my, like, whole tabloid journalism career, they were kept very separate. And I think even the idea of, like, you know, journalists being on camera, there was a nervousness around it, you know, oh, we're going to create, like, you know, this, I don't know whether it's like an ego thing, or, like, you know, by putting this person on camera, they become indispensable, and what we're going to do if they leave. And that, you know, there was always reasons to think, why shouldn't we do it, rather than why should we do it? And I think we're seeing quite a stark pivot now, particularly with legacy media, where there's, you know, pivoting. I mean, we've seen, you know, everyone's moving to video, but everyone is putting their own journalists or staff on camera. And you see, like, those in the industry who are leading the way have been doing this for a while. And so I think we need to embrace it. Like, you know, if we've got our team, whether it's, you know, creators we partner with, because we do, you know, at LAD and certainly Betches, we partner with influencers, we partner with creators, that just elevates the content that we're trying to do. I think we're not necessarily losing, you know, the overall brand, or, like, you know, sort of collective voice of that brand. But I don't think there's any harm whatsoever. In fact, I actively encourage it to be able, you know, on the journalism side as well, no one tells our stories better than our journalists. And so I think it's something that we're seeing a lot more people embrace, and we shouldn't be afraid of it.
Sticking with sort of predictions for going ahead, obviously vertical video has been so sort of dominant with Instagram Reels, TikTok, that kind of thing recently. What do you think will be the next kind of big trends or media formats that we should be looking to?
I mean, vertical video is going nowhere, and we know that. Like, it's, you know, it's such an important format. I think, kind of to my point before about, like, diversifying some of the platforms, I think we personally, over on our side of things, we're being a bit more experimental and just seeing, like, you know, maybe different formats for different platforms, or just sort of testing things. I think that testing spirit is so important. Actually, you know, we can sometimes, if you are a data-led business, you can go quite far down a rabbit hole and be like, we've seen this work, let's do it to death. And that isn't the answer either. You know, whether it is more of sort of carousels we're seeing, you know, particularly with the downturn of UGC, you know, again, we've seen that audiences are wise to it. You know, back in the day, people would have just ripped something they saw on someone's TikTok and, you know, put it on our own. That, again, people are just wise to it, and creators are wise to it. You know, it's their IP. So experimenting with maybe some headline templates, some carousels. Again, I mean, I mentioned Substack before. Like, Aileen, who's our CEO of Betches in the US, she started a newsletter on Substack. You know, we've seen actually a few prominent journalists. Again, my background is the US, so it's going to be a US reference, but there was a gentleman called Terry Moran who was fired from ABC, and he just went straight to Substack, didn't need to go to another, like, media company, just met his audience where they were. And that can be on, you know, you can video publish, you can do a newsletter. So I think experimenting with that, anything that's going to help drive our audience back to us as a brand, strengthen the brand. Like I said, we've been very platform reliant, and I think the way to sort of try and tip that balance is to kind of make sure that however people are coming into the LAD funnel, they're staying with us and getting that quality from us. So we're very experimental.
Great. And in terms of any other priorities kind of for the year ahead, what is LADbible really going to be focusing on in 2026?
Oh, so many ambitions. It's hard to narrow it down to one or two. I think immediate term, it's growth. Like, as I said, on the web editorial side of things, certainly it's a bit of a reset point. It's a bit of a sort of shift in focus, back to that originality, and building up from that. And yeah, just getting great stories. I think also, I mean, one thing I really want is to, like, surprise people. I want audiences out there, maybe not our traditional audiences, to read a great story and then be like, oh, that was LADbible. And, to that point about sort of older stereotypes that may be associated with us, I would like to dispel the myths around us and put great content out there where people are like, that is a great that's a great name brand, whether it's any one of our brands. It could be Lad, it could be Unilad, Tyler Betches, food, sport, whatever. I mean, sport particularly, we're coming into a World Cup year, so there's going to be an awful lot happening with LADbible. But yeah, just delight and surprise people and be like, okay, yeah, you're one to watch. We love an underdog. But and we're disruptors. We are industry disruptors. Solly is a brilliant brain. The team here are brilliant. We've never fit a mould. We want to be able to challenge like more of the legacy media brands out there, where maybe people haven't associated LADbible Group with its journalism. So I think, surprising people would be a big goal of mine.
Sounds exciting. Well, unfortunately, that is all we've got time for, but it was amazing to chat to you. So many great insights there. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your time, Evie. Appreciate it.